The gathering storm, the observation deck of the Eternal Sanctuary, fell silent as Coordinator Zephix transmitted the final calculations. Beings from 47 different star systems stood motionless, their various forms of existence unified by a single emotion: absolute terror. The holographic display floating above the assembly showed something that should not exist, could not exist, yet undeniably did. Dimensional rifts were appearing throughout the galaxy. Not the small tears that occasionally troubled spacetime, but massive ruptures that consumed entire star systems. The laws of physics themselves were unraveling, and every calculation pointed to the same horrifying conclusion. Within 8,000 standard cycles, reality as they knew it would cease to exist. Zephix had served as coordinator for 19,000 cycles. His species, the Vormithi, had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations. They had archived the wisdom of species that predated most current galactic citizens by millions of years. Never in all that accumulated knowledge had they encountered a problem without solution. Until now, the display shifted, showing projections of the collapse. Solar systems would be consumed first, then entire galaxies would fragment into non-existence. There would be no survivors, no remnants, no legacy. Everything would simply stop being. Elder Thracics of the Keeper Collective stood first. His species had existed for 70 million years, shepherding younger civilizations and protecting ancient knowledge. His voice carried the weight of epochs when he spoke. "We have consulted the archives of the Four," Thracic said, his form shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed deep sorrow. "This event has occurred in previous universal cycles. There is no prevention, no escape. We must prepare our peoples for the end with dignity." Around the chamber, other representatives began to nod in agreement. The singing crystals of harmonics began their death hymns immediately, their crystalline bodies resonating with frequencies that spoke of acceptance and peaceful surrender. The weavers, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form 3 million years ago, simply began to dissipate, choosing immediate non-existence over prolonged waiting. "We of the Eternal Archive," announced Keeper Silthera, "will dedicate our remaining cycles to preserving what we can. Perhaps if consciousness persists in some form beyond this reality, our memories will endure." The mood in the chamber was one of solemn resignation. Species that had never agreed on anything found unity in accepting the inevitable. Research stations would be closed. Exploration missions would be recalled. The galaxy would spend its final millennia in peaceful preparation for oblivion. Then Ambassador James Carter cleared his throat. The sound was small, almost apologetic, but in the vast silence of the assembly, it carried like a thunderclap. Every sensor, optical organ, and consciousness probe turned toward the human delegation's platform. Humans had joined the Federation only 30 years ago, barely a heartbeat in galactic terms. They were considered enthusiastic, but primitive, possessing faster-than-light capability, but little else of note. James Carter stood, his simple cloth uniform looking almost comical among the advanced biosuits and energy matrices of elder species. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair, wearing glasses he did not technically need, but kept out of habit. He looked entirely unremarkable. "I apologize for the interruption," James said, his voice steady, "but I need to make sure I understand the situation correctly." Coordinator Zephix's form pulsed with what might have been confusion or irritation. "Ambassador Carter, we understand this is difficult news for such a young species to process. Perhaps you should return to your homeworld to be with your people in these final cycles." "Actually, I'd like to stay and discuss our response plan," James replied, pulling out a small data tablet. "I've been running some preliminary numbers, and I think we might have more options than you're considering." The chamber erupted in what could only be described as polite but firm disbelief. Keeper Silthera's form brightened with what humans would interpret as amusement. Ambassador, with respect, humanity has existed for mere thousands of years. The species in this chamber have combined knowledge spanning billions of years. If a solution existed, we would have found it. James nodded thoughtfully. That's a fair point. But I noticed something interesting. You said this event has happened before in previous universal cycles. That means reality has ended and then begun again, right? Correct, Zefix confirmed. The universe undergoes cycles of creation and destruction. This is simply the end phase of our current cycle. Okay, but something survived to start the next cycle, James continued, his fingers moving across his tablet. The fundamental forces, the base particles, the potential for matter and energy to exist again. So complete annihilation isn't actually what happens. It's more like a complete reset. Elder Thrassix moved forward, his ancient form casting patterns of light. This is known, young ambassador. But no consciousness survives the transition. No information persists. It is death in the most absolute sense. Maybe, James said, and the word hung in the air like a challenge. Or maybe no one has tried hard enough to find a way to survive it. The silence that followed was different now. Not the silence of mourning, but of shock at what many perceived as either courage or stupidity. The energy requirements alone, Zefix began, but James interrupted, are massive. Yes, I've seen the calculations. But we have 8,000 cycles. Do you know what humanity accomplished in just the last 100 years of our timeline? We went from basic combustion engines to quantum computing. We decoded the human genome and learned to edit it. We developed artificial intelligence and created fusion reactions. We built structures in space and learned to manipulate matter at the atomic level. He looked around the chamber, meeting the gazes of beings far older and presumably wiser than himself. I'm not saying I have the answer right now. I'm saying that 8,000 cycles is a lot of time. Time to research, to experiment, to try things that seem impossible. And if there's even a fraction of a chance that we can survive this, shouldn't we try? Impossible is not a challenge to be overcome, Keeper Silthra said gently. It is a reality to be accepted. Asterisk, respectfully, Keeper, that's where humans differ, James replied. We've been told things were impossible our entire history. Flying was impossible until we did it. Leaving our planet was impossible until we did it. Faster than light travel was impossible according to our own physics, until we figured out how to bend the rules. Impossible just means nobody's solved it yet. The singing crystals stopped their death hymns. The weavers paused their dissolution. Around the chamber, beings that had accepted their fate began to look at this strange human with something they had not felt in the hours since learning of the collapse. Curiosity. What exactly are you proposing? Zefix asked, his tone shifting from patronizing to genuinely interested. James smiled, the expression looking almost out of place in the solemn chamber. I'm proposing we don't go gentle into that good night. I'm proposing that humanity, with whatever help we can get, dedicates every resource we have to finding a solution. We'll call it Project Continuity. And if you fail? Thrassix asked. Then we fail, James acknowledged. But we'll fail trying. And honestly, what else are we going to do with 8,000 cycles? Sit around feeling sorry for ourselves? The chamber erupted in debate. Some species insisted this was foolishness, a waste of precious remaining time. Others, particularly younger civilizations, began to see the logic. If the end was inevitable anyway, why not spend the time searching for alternatives? Back on Earth, the response to the dimensional collapse news was exactly what James had predicted. Within hours of his transmission, every major university had established new research departments. The United Earth government allocated unprecedented funding to physics research. Private companies competed to develop new technologies. Children in schools began learning advanced mathematics and quantum theory as standard curricula. The rest of the galaxy watched with a mixture of pity and fascination as humanity mobilized for war against reality itself. Most elder species considered it a charming but ultimately futile gesture. They continued their preparations for the end with dignity and grace. But a few, a very few, began to wonder. The humans had surprised them before by achieving interstellar travel centuries ahead of predictions. They had contributed unexpected innovations to Federation technology despite their youth. Perhaps, just perhaps, they might surprise everyone again, in the depths of space. The dimensional rifts continued to grow, uncaring of the debates and hopes of the beings they would eventually consume. The countdown to oblivion continued its steady march, and on a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, humanity did what it had always done best. It got to work. Asterisk against all logic 300 cycles had passed since Ambassador James Carter's speech at the Eternal Sanctuary. By galactic standards, it was barely a moment. By human standards, it was roughly 7,000 years of relentless, obsessive work. Observer Kelrith floated through the corridors of humanity's primary research station, a massive structure that now orbited Earth's moon. She was a member of the witnessing caste, beings whose sole purpose was to document the final cycles of civilization for whatever might come after. She had expected to record humanity's gradual acceptance of doom, their eventual descent into despair. Instead, she found herself documenting something entirely different. This station was chaos incarnate. Humans rushed through corridors, their short lifespans meaning that none of the original researchers remained. These were descendants of descendants of descendants, each generation building upon the work of those before. They shouted to each other in multiple languages, argued over calculations, and celebrated small victories with an enthusiasm that seemed inappropriate given the circumstances. Observer Kelrith, a young human woman, approached, her name tag identifying her as Dr. Sarah Okongwo. Perfect timing. We're about to run the 73rd simulation of the dimensional anchor array. Would you like to witness? Kelrith followed Sarah into a massive chamber where hundreds of humans worked at stations, surrounding a central holographic display. The display showed a mathematical model so complex that even Kelrith's enhanced consciousness struggled to process it fully. We've made significant progress, Sarah explained, her eyes bright with excitement that Kelrith had learned was characteristic of humans facing impossible challenges. The original problem was that dimensional rifts occur because space-time loses its structural integrity. Think of it like a fabric wearing thin. Everything we tried before attempted to patch the fabric after it tore. And this approach differs how? Kelrith asked, genuinely curious despite herself. We're trying to reinforce the fabric before it tears, Sarah said. By creating artificial anchor points throughout the galaxy, we can distribute the dimensional stress across a wider area. It won't stop the collapse, but our models suggest it might slow it down significantly. How significantly? Sarah grinned. Enough to buy us more time to figure out the next step. The simulation began. Kelrith watched as the model universe in the hologram started to collapse, dimensional rifts spreading like cracks in glass. Then the anchor points activated, and something remarkable happened. The collapse slowed. Not by much, but measurably. The simulation ran for what would have been millennia in real time, and the modeled universe persisted far longer than any previous prediction. The humans erupted in celebration. They hugged each other, some cried, others laughed. Sarah turned to Kelrith with tears streaming down her face. Do you understand what this means? We bought ourselves another 2,000 cycles. 2,000 cycles to develop the next solution. Kelrith felt something she had not experienced in ages. Uncertainty about the future. Not the certainty of doom, but genuine uncertainty about what might happen. It was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. News of the successful simulation spread through the galaxy faster the light itself. The response was mixed. Many elder species dismissed it as theoretical fantasy that could never be implemented on a real galactic scale. The energy requirements were astronomical, requiring the output of millions of stars. The coordination needed would be unprecedented. The technology to create stable dimensional anchors did not exist and might never exist, but some species, particularly those who had been quietly watching humanity's efforts, began to reconsider their resignation. The architects of Ven were the first to make contact. They were an ancient species known for constructing massive stellar engineering projects. Their representative, Constructor Prime Havix, arrived at the Human Research Station unannounced. "We have reviewed your simulation data," Havix stated, his mechanical voice carrying no emotion. "The dimensional anchor array concept has merit. However, you lack the engineering capability to construct such devices on the necessary scale." Sarah met with Havix personally, expecting rejection. Instead, she received an offer. "My species has spent the last 300 cycles preparing for non-existence," Havix continued. "We have accomplished everything we wished to accomplish. We built wonders across the galaxy and considered our legacy secure. But you have reminded us that legacy means nothing if there is no one to remember it. The architects of Ven will assist in constructing your anchor points." Within 50 cycles, more species joined the effort. The energy singers, beings of living plasma who existed within stars, offered to help channel the massive power requirements. The Hive Collective, a species of trillions of small insectoid creatures working as one consciousness, volunteered their coordination abilities for the complex logistics. Even some of the elder species, while not actively participating, stopped dismissing the project as foolishness. The dimensional anchor array took shape over the next 500 cycles. Massive structures, each the size of a small moon, were positioned throughout the galaxy. They were marvels of cooperative engineering, combining human innovation, architect construction, energy singer power management, and contributions from dozens of other species. Coordinator Zephyx, who had delivered the original Doom announcement, visited one of the completed anchor points. He floated beside James Carter's great-great-great-grandson, Admiral Robert Carter, observing the structure's activation. "I never believed this day would come," Zephyx admitted, his form pulsing with complex emotions. "When your ancestor first proposed this, I thought it was the desperate fantasy of a species too young to understand true impossibility." Robert smiled, an expression so similar to his ancestors that Zephyx felt a strange continuity across the generations. He knew it was a long shot, but he also knew that humans are really bad at accepting that something can't be done. It's one of our most annoying qualities, apparently. "Perhaps annoying to some," Zephyx said thoughtfully, "but today I find it rather inspiring." The anchor point hummed to life, its energy signature spreading through space-time like ripples on a pond. Across the galaxy, thousands of similar structures activated simultaneously. The dimensional rifts, which had been consuming star systems at an accelerating rate, suddenly slowed their expansion. The effect was not dramatic. The universe was still collapsing. Reality was still unraveling. But the mathematical predictions that had given them 8,000 cycles now extended to over 10,000. Humanity had bought the galaxy 2,000 additional cycles of existence. More importantly, they had proven something fundamental. The impossible was merely difficult. In the cycles that followed, the project expanded. New ideas emerged from the collaborative effort. The Keepers, who had initially planned to simply archive history, began sharing ancient knowledge they had deemed irrelevant to survival. Techniques from extinct civilizations, half-forgotten theories, experimental data from species that had existed billions of years ago. All were brought forth and examined with fresh perspectives. A young human physicist named Dr. Amara O.C. made a breakthrough that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Working with data from the archives of before, she noticed patterns in how previous universal cycles had ended. The resets were not random. There was structure to how reality dissolved and reformed. What if we don't try to prevent the collapse? Amara proposed at a joint session of human and alien researchers. What if we ride it through? Like a ship navigating a storm, rather than trying to stop the storm itself. The idea was radical. Instead of fighting against the dimensional collapse, they would create protected spaces, bubbles of stabilized reality that could potentially survive the transition between universal cycles. The energy requirements made the dimensional anchor array look simple by comparison. The technology was decades, maybe centuries beyond current capabilities. But they had time now. Time humanity had bought them. Elder Thracics, who had spoken of accepting the end with dignity, now found himself leading a research team exploring immerse theories. The ancient being, who had existed for eons, worked alongside humans who had lived for mere decades. Yet he found their brief lifespans gave them a unique perspective. They thought in terms of what could be accomplished within a lifetime, and built frameworks for the next generation to continue. It was inefficient by galactic standards, but remarkably effective. Observer Kelrith continued her documentation, but her role had changed. She was no longer recording the end of civilization. She was recording something unprecedented. Civilizations that had accepted death, choosing to fight for life, because one young species had been too stubborn to accept the inevitable. The dimensional rifts continued their consumption of reality. Star systems still vanished into non-existence. The countdown to universal collapse still marched forward. But now, across thousands of worlds, beings of countless forms worked together on the most ambitious project ever conceived. Not just to delay the end, but to potentially survive it. In the vast research station orbiting Earth, now expanded to accommodate scientists from 40 different species. A new message was inscribed in every major galactic language. It was a quote from the long-dead ambassador James Carter. Words that had sparked this impossible endeavor. Impossible just means nobody's solved it yet. The galaxy had 8,000 cycles remaining. Perhaps more if they continued to find ways to slow the collapse. In cosmic terms, it was nothing. In human terms, it was nearly 200,000 years of possibilities. And for the first time, since learning of the dimensional rifts, beings across the galaxy looked to the future not with resignation, but with something dangerous and beautiful. Hope. The universe was still dying. Reality was still unraveling. But somewhere in the chaos of equations, experiments, and desperate innovation, a solution might exist. And if it did, the combined civilizations of the galaxy, led by the stubborn persistence of humanity, would find it. The observer Kelrith added a final note to her documentation. They were told it was impossible. They chose to try anyway. Perhaps that is what it means to be truly alive. The end.